Okay, now we're going on to part four. If you haven't seen the other parts, you can go to the very last few seconds of this and click in your top right hand corner. It'll take you to one, take you back to the very first one. And then from then on, and even on this one and on, it will be in your top left hand corner when we go to the next part. Usually I don't say anything about it, it just clicks off. I basically just go to the point that it notches, and the editor keeps taking up about the last 15-20 seconds. So quite often it edits the fact out of me telling you to go to the next one. But here we are discussing more about um, the ancient sea gods, Yam, Leviathan, and things along that nature. And we were just talking about how at least one writer has pointed out regarding the Ugaritic cycle that there was YW, so Yah or Yah, and how it has etymological ties to Yahweh itself of the Old Testament, and the priest of Yah, and uh, the priest of Baal who fought at Mount Carmel with Elijah, and the whole telling of it. And the Ugaritic text in Lotan that's talked about there is possibly another of Yam's helpers. This is again like the Kraken has been seen, is given epithets of wriggling serpent and mighty one with seven heads. And Isaiah 27:1 uses the first of these phrases to describe Leviathan, although in this case the name Leviathan may refer to an unnamed historical political enemy of Israel rather than the original serpent monster. So in other words, they're using it as, well, these people were believing in it and we defeated those people, so we defeated that god. You see that effect too, and how it's claimed as being such. And quite a lot of the Old not Testament, but the old texts that you'll find of other people will describe in a way that if they defeat their God, then they have control of the aspects of him. And if they grab the scepter, and the scepter gives control and things. And this leads back to that idea of this lightning bolt situation that oh, by the way, that lightning bolt, it's seen exactly the same with those prongs that come out the side of it like this on either way, all the way from Tibetan temples to over in India, all the way up and through the Middle East and even into Europe and so on, and old ancient Proto-Indo-European ball pictures and all kinds of stuff. And it shows you the connection of that symbology much less than just the tale itself. In Psalms 104, Leviathan is not described as harmful in any way, but simply as a creature of the ocean and part of God's creation. It's possible that the authors of Job 41:2-6, on the other hand, based the Leviathan on description of Egyptian animal mythology, where the crocodile is the enemy of the solar deity Horus and is subdued by either Horus or by the pharaoh, and you can see this in their art a lot. And this is in contrast to the typical descriptions of the sea monster trope in terms of mythological combat. And no, it's not the whole exact thing, but it's looked at as being, here's an example of it in a smaller way. Just like later King George killing the dragon, and all these type of situations are the same exact symbology, and people don't make connections that all of this goes together with a concept. And if you look at the story of Leviathan, I did that video on it whenever they caught that over 20-foot long Nile crocodile, and it shows you this. Hey, look at the size of these things. And so this is Leviathan, and it talked about his scaled stomach and all these type of things. The only two that don't fit with it is one description here with seven heads, but the other one doesn't have that. He has a giant head, teeth, all these situations, scales over his body. Who can defeat him? That type of thing. And that he also breathes fire and everything, but that connects it to a dragon, doesn't it? Yeah, they're thrown out Bible stories that people wonder why a lot of them were thrown out. And some of them do contain tales of dragons. An interesting one about Jesus being a young boy tells a story where Mary and she's having to still hold him, and at the cave they go by, dragons come out, and she sets down Jesus, and Jesus stands up in front of him and gives his presence, and that they all become subdued and walk away or whatever. And I don't know, it's written in prose too, it comes across as neater, but so Jesus controls dragons, or he does these type of things even as a youth and all this stuff. But yeah, surely they threw that one out. They tried to keep it with a more rational thing. In fact, in the Bible, you can see where they try to not give it so much mythological type context to it, and they don't want to give a idea that they have a old Titan theogony going on, but yet it still shows up. It's just shown as being the angels having done this thing, and 1/3 fell from heaven and did all this, and then instead of all these pantheons doing it, it ends up being people doing and pulling off these same exact things, but they are doing it through the power of God. And so you can see the correlation there. And just like Zeothura or Utnapishtim and the Noah of the Sumerians, where both of them get to, one is giving extended long life and blah blah blah, the other one is actually immortalized and so on, and seen in the Gilgamesh tales and everything, whereas suddenly the Bible one is given a much more humble type thing happens to him, but it's also the correlation again in the same story of Kronos and the castration and everything, and shows the theogony there, but in a different way. For when Noah comes out of the boat, the story basically boils down that he instantly makes a vine, and within too quick of a time also, by the way, and there's so much problems with this, but he instantly makes a vine and becomes drunk, and then something happens, no one knows what, and then his children cover him up, and supposedly was just seeing his father naked. That's stupid. We've all seen our fathers naked, probably, but at the same time, no, this curse that was put upon him and everything, this idea that he was supposed to have been castrated by him while he was, drunk and so on and all this stuff, and then he cursed his grandkids. So he doesn't get his own thing, an extended life or immortality. He gets to become a blithering drunk, castrated, and yelling and cursing at his grandkids, which of course a curse of a drunk man, even though as powerful as Noah and loved by God as he was, doesn't do anything. But two things are tried to be done there, is to curse Canaanites, because they wanted to take their land that they primordially had. And that's your Phoenicians too, and the idea of the place that's over there. So it shows you that there's more in play than the story than there originally was in play. And that can be seen in later things, like, well, I'm going to try to do a video, although it'll be just as bad as this one, on the Crusades. Shows you on the Crusades, and then now in modern day we're supposed to be looked at as being, oh, bad white man, how he did the Crusades, but that was just trying to take back Holy Lands. And if we look at the stories of this time and who was there at the time and who was involved in the stories, and then who is now invaded into the area there, and that was just meant to push it back. And then a religion that is also attached to this exact same thing and trying to be a new telling. And that's the reason there's so much contest between it, because it's just a retelling of the same story, and you're trying to usurp that story and then say that somebody showed up later who apparently is a pale redhead by Muhammad, by the way, and he had a flying horse and all these type situations, and that's just like a retelling of a Pegasus type story and trying to put it all together. No, he wasn't God like Jesus was supposed to be or anything. He's just a prophet, but that's another thing. Let's not get into that. People get too sensitive sometimes. So he's not described as harmful in that one Psalms tale, and it shows you a connection of Egypt and the Canaanite religion and everything that goes along with it, and how it does do with the solar deity too. And so we're still talking about sun gods and everything, and how it worked, and the fight between things, and it happens every day, and it happens every cycle, and it happens every year, and does these type of things with different people. Leviathan, which is said to mean twisted and coiled, but Levi and Levites and the Levant all hook up to this name quite well, and so it shows you something different. And are they snake worshippers necessarily or anything, or what's the idea here? Well, no, it's not that really either, though, is it? But Leviathan is a sea monster referenced in the Tanakh or Old Testament. The word has become synonymous with any large sea monster or creature. In literature, like Herman Melville's Moby Dick, it refers to great whales. And in modern Hebrew, it just now simply means whale. And that's just try to get away from the idea that it was attached to this same theogony of all these other people at other times, and go, oh, well, they're just talking about whale and knowing the Jonah and the whale, and he swallowed whales and stuff. That'll come up again here shortly, too, in the series. Um, but it's described extensively in Job 41 and mentioned in Isaiah 27:1, and it's not just apparently like a whale. And one interesting fact is it says that he killed Leviathan and then he fed it to the people of the wilderness. And if this is a person that they're supposed to be talking about, that's a weird story. And if it's a whale, then so he apparently people are going through some type of drought and somebody actually killed a whale and it was able to feed a whole community. And that can be seen as possibly having some reality to it, but that doesn't sound like it's supposed to go with the story that we're told to believe. Later Jewish sources also describe Leviathan as a dragon. Yeah, you got to look this stuff up. And he lives in the sources of the deep. So this again is the abyss and the Absu and the Sumerian origin. Who, along with the male land monster Behemoth, which is tried to be Bahamut, will be served up to the righteous at the end of time. So yeah, they're supposed to eat him and stuff. Huh? Leviathan of the Middle Ages was used as an image of Satan, by the way, endangering both God's creatures and attempting to eat them, and God's creation by threatening it with upheavals in the waters of chaos. And people still see that today with things like sharks and all those things, and the ocean and the abyss, and try to make connections to it. And anything that's unknown is put in that way. And of course, that was the old monsters of old, and our monsters of old are now known, and they're lions and tigers and bears, oh my, and crocodiles and unicorns of the Bible was not that fanciful little horse thing, but it actually was the one-horned rhinoceros. And I've gotten to that also. And so we can see some of these connections to different animals that are actually existent, and they're really just talking about that, but it also makes a connection, the disconnection from these titans things and concepts to here, and then giants of old, and then dinosaurs, and it just can get weird if you can go that way with it. Let's continue though. St. Thomas Aquinas described Leviathan as the demon of envy. First, in punishing the corresponding sinners, and the Secunda, question 36, Leviathan became associated with and may originally refer to the visual motif of the hell mouth. And I don't know if you've seen that, but that's this serpent creature that swallows all the people in the abyss. It's a monstrous animal into whose mouth the damned appear in the last judgment. I wish I could throw in a picture right now, but they have a lot of these pictures where it's done in that old style, and it looks like they're walking into his mouth type thing, or walking out, but anyhow. And they're supposed to go into the mouth and disappear at the last judgment. This is found in Anglo-Saxon art from around 800s and after, and later all over Europe in that art style that I'm telling you about. Behemoth is the beast mentioned in Job 40:15 through 24. Suggested identifies range from people believe in ideas that it could be a dinosaur, to crocodiles, to mythological creatures, and metaphorically the name has come to be used for an extremely large and powerful entity. When you look at Behemoth, it really seems to be looking as an elephant, and the only thing people talk about is tail being like a tree. Actually, the word there transposes into something that seems more like a branch of a tree. And so you look at an elephant's tail, and it's just that little tail with a puff on the end hanging down, and that's the same type of tree branch and the same word they used for like the pharaohs to swat the flies off themselves with. And so it wouldn't have necessarily have been like that. And the girth of it and the weight of it is more described in a whole situation, and that it can't be controlled in situations, and the unicorns, well, they can control elephants eventually, and we know all about that, and Hannibal in the Alps and all that type of situation. But that rhinoceros cannot be tamed, and so it's why they have that weird story about unicorns. I'll do another one about unicorns. I did one about 2 years ago, but I'll do another one and give a different flavor than I did in the other one that was there. Um, in Jewish apocrypha and pseudo epigraphica, such as 2nd century BC book of Enoch, Behemoth is the primal unconquerable monster of the land, as Leviathan is the primal monster of the waters and sea, and Ziz, the primordial monster of the sky. So there's these three entities that are there: land, earth, and sky, right? And that's important too. According to this text, Leviathan lives in the abyss, and that definitely hooks it up to there. By the way, just throw in right now, Ethiopia was never called Ethiopia until recently. That was called Abyssinia. That's because out that Red Sea that everybody's familiar going and traversing through, that out there is a large expanse or an abyss of the ocean. While Behemoth and the land monster lives in an invisible desert area described being east of the Garden of Eden. And so now we find something that's going to be on the other side of the Tigris and Euphrates out in that area. And this again corresponds to the rhinos that are in that area versus the ones that are deep in Africa. They didn't know at this time. If you look at Herodotus' map, even at the time of that, they don't show sub-Saharan Africa really exists. They know that it went the desert went off into a sea of sand and abyss in a way of itself too. All right, so looking further into this, a Jewish rabbinic legend describes a great battle in which will take place between them at the end of time. So again, this looks very Celtic and a few others. They will interlock with one another, engage in combat. With his horns of the behemoth will gore this with strength the fish, or Leviathan itself, will leap to meet him with his fins, or his propulsion, with power. Their creator will approach them with his mighty sword and slay them both, and then from the beautiful skin of the Leviathan, God will construct canopies to shelter the righteous, who will eat the meat of the behemoth and the Leviathan amid great joy and merriment. And this is in Jewish telling and everything, so you don't think that it actually hooks all up to this whole grandiose idea, and it definitely still does. Same thing, same deal, Old Testament, it's right there. And from the skin they will construct canopies to shelter for the righteous. That's because at this time all this is going to a tent idea and a tabernacle and all this type thing. And so these people that already have these stone buildings and stone houses would go, man, that's great for those tent people. They got a new tent made out of a skin of an animal thing that's got to reek real bad until it gets all cured, and then they're all going to eat it. They're going to eat these animals. But if you look at it in the way that it's taken, or at the very end of time and everything ends, ta-da, and our great feast is to eat whale meat and rhinoceros, is this what we're led to believe? Well, no, it's a whole twisting of an idea. They were here before us, and then at the end it all goes away together and they end up being the food of ours. But there's a few more strange ways of looking at that, but the strangest thing of all is for people of nowadays to think that there are stories in the Bible where there's a talking donkey, and that it really does correlate with a lot of these other stories, and maybe there's connections that people aren't willing to see. And of course, if you don't really read the Bible yourself and just go to church, they never talk about such things, do they? Now, that Ziz that they talked about of the sky is a giant griffin-like bird in Jewish mythology, Jewish, and is said to be large enough to be able to block out the sun with its wingspan. So this is again the Thunderbird situation that is known everywhere, even into the Americas. It is considered a giant animal monster corresponding to archetypical type creatures. And so no different really. Rabbis have said that the Ziz is comparable to the Persian Shimurg, while modern scholars compare the Ziz to Sumerian Anzu and the ancient Greek Phoenix. Behemoth, Leviathan, and Ziz were traditionally a favorite decoration motif for rabbis living in Germany in the old days. And if you look at this picture here, even though it's hard to see, we see a few of the things that I talked about, and I'll give you a few more. Here's this griffin dragon iconography, and you've seen the gates around there where they show ancient what looks like a unicorn and a dragon, right, and along with other creatures, and that's supposed to have been a different type than this, but still a dragon type. And if you look at it, a lion-headed, winged creature with the claws and everything that's on it, bird legs, and this is something very much griffinish. I've told you before, I believe it comes off finding triceratops heads that are exposed out in this exact area that they're talking about, and that does seem to correspond. If you look on his wristwatch, though, there is that sun symbology. These are sun worshippers. Shamash is the son of them and the same name that's in the Bible. And here is that uh, throwing his lightning bolts, and there are three spikes, and there's another one, there are three. A lot of people looking at this don't realize it or catch into it, but actually up under his arm here, slung in and held to him, is also that sickle. And this is Ninurta fighting the creature, and or Marduk. And so you say Marduk, sun and thunder god of Babylon, with his thunderbolts pursues Anzu, and Anzu stole the tablets of destiny, and that's in the tale that they have to get it back, and the theogony they have. So Zu, very much like Ziz, also known as Anzu and Imdagud in Sumerian, from An of heaven and Zu to know, so to know heaven, getting the Mies, or they got that tablets, right? In Sumerian language is a lesser divinity of Akkadian mythology later, and the sun is the bird goddess of Cyrus. Now, so you have a connection to a bird god, Cyrus, and you have Osiris, and you have the connection of Osiris to Horus in Egyptian mythology, but then Horus is that bird-headed god. And quite often when you look at pictures like this, you'll see this guy that is a bird-headed falcon type, and he has the pine cone in his hand and is with the tree of life, and these followers of Shemsu Hor, and something that is recorded even in them as having happened in elder times and works together with it. So Osiris and Cyrus, Osiris of Cyrus. Now, he was conceived by the pure waters of the Absu and the wide earth, and both Zu and Cyrus are seen as massive birds who can breathe fire and water, although Zu is alternately seen as a lion-headed eagle, or i.e. the griffin as you saw in that picture there. Anzu was a servant of the chief sky god Enlil, guard of the throne in Enlil's sanctuary, possibly previous a symbol of Anu. For whom Anzu stole the tablets of destinies. So, hoping to determine the fate of all things, in one version of the legend, the gods sent Lugal Banda, and this is a great man type, Lugal, to retrieve the tablets, who in turn killed Anzu. In another, Ea, or Enki, and Belet, Ili, conceived Ninurta for the purpose of retrieving the tablets. In a third legend found in the hymn of Ashurbanipal, that is when we see the Marduk legend, and Marduk is said to have used and killed Anzu. So a retelling of the same thing, and indeed Sumerian lasted long enough that they have this change over time. And as I said, people don't realize that Egypt had this same situation and this little change that goes into it. And of course, all these people that are connected around and through the Fertile Crescent and up into Greece and everything all have slight changes that are happening, and each in their own way, leading to slight variations on a theme of the same type of telling. Anzu was the servant of the chief sky god Enlil, guardian of the throne in Enlil's sanctuary, possibly previously a symbol of Anu, as they said, though. In Sumerian and Akkadian mythology, Zu is a divine storm bird and the personification of the southern wind and the thunderclouds. This demon, half man, half bird, stole the tablets of destiny from Enlil and hid them on a mountaintop. Anu ordered the other gods to retrieve the tablets, even though they all feared the demon. According to one text, Marduk killed the bird, but in another text, it died through the arrows of the god Ninurta. So this is just different retellings of the same situation, and of course an epoch of time and people changing the pantheon. The bird is also referred to, as I said before, as Imdagud or Anzu. a Babylonian deity associated with cosmogony, represented as stripping the feather of the gods of Imsimi, usually translated to crown, but as it was on the seat of Bel or Baal, is actually the ideal creative organ, and that would be something different. Ham is the Chaldean zoo, and so when we talk about Hamites and those Caucasians that are there, Ham is a division of the Caucasian race in the Bible, and Hamites, and both are cursed for the same allegorically described crime, which parallels the mutilation of Uranus by Kronos and of Set by Horus, and shows you the same connections and how Ham got given the curse, but actually it wasn't totally Ham, was it? It was his fourth child and stuff. Black people now claim that made him black somehow, but then who would that marry? And there's no other description of like that. It never says that he's black or anything, and I think it's just another case of them trying to interject them something like Egypt or the Bible that they weren't a part of. A Babylonian deity associated, though, with that mythology and cosmology. In Mesopotamian mythology, the Tablet of Destinies, Dup Shematai in Sumerian, not as frequently misquoted in general works with the Tablets of Destinies, was envisaged as a clay tablet inscribed with cuneiform writings, as impressed with the cylinder seals, which, as a permanent legal document, conferred upon the god Enlil his supreme authority and ruler of the universe. And they use these cylinder seals. Again, I've shown where there's, in the earliest of Sumerians, there are cylinder seals, and it goes all the way through to Akkadian times, but there is also in Egypt, and then also the mace head symbology, the master of beasts found in the Gebel Arak knife and things like that. And so it shows connections that people really don't want to try to make about these Fertile Crescent people of older times. In the Sumerian poem Ninurta and the Turtle, it is the god Enki rather than Enlil who holds the tablets. Both this poem and the Akkadian Anzu poem show a concern of the theft of the tablet by the bird Imdugud, or the Sumerian Anzu, in Akkadian later. Supposedly, whoever possessed the tablet rules over the universe or knew how to do everything. In the Babylonian Enuma Elish, Tiamat bestows this tablet on Kingu. Some instances spelled Kingu just were like king straightforward. It's where we believe that we get the word king, by the way, and gives him command of her army. Marduk, the chosen champion of the gods, then fights and destroys Tiamat and her army. Marduk reclaims the tablets of destinies for himself, thereby strengthening his rule among the gods. In fact, it was part of the deal when everybody else didn't want to. Pardon me for getting a drink. And so this is another telling of it. And also, I have to mention in the same tale, then he takes Tiamat and he uses her chest as what holds up the firmament type of idea. And they mention it in that concept there. And that's a weird one, because before her chest was put there, wasn't everybody was there and everybody was breathing and doing things? No, it's a different idea of something like Atlas, and something that holds up the sky, that keeps the world in check. For man, air is real important, and we don't even think about it breathing all day. But so yeah, you ought to read Ninurta and the Turtle, though. It's one that I might do a video on in the future, and then try to do a connective thing that works up on it too, because there's so many times that you can tell the story like this and then make all these connections just like I'm talking about. That's like a spider web, and I think it's incredible. The tablet can be compared with the concept of the me, or divine decrees. In Sumerian mythology, a me, conventionally pronounced meh, or ne, or parsu sometimes, that would have been more Akkadian though, and not the Sumerians, is one of the decrees of the gods, foundations of these social institutions, religious practices, technologies, behaviors, mores, and human condition that makes civilization actually work as the Sumerians understood it even possible. and they are fundamental to the Sumerian understanding of the relationship between humanity and gods. And so it's really looked at as more like their sacred writings, like somebody took their sacred writings, like stole the Bible from them and so on. And this is the same idea that's reflected in the Bible again, where you see the idea that they got taken into Babylon, back in the same area, but much later, and of course what Babylon has to do with, and then Cyrus the Great letting them back loose. Then they were to find a part of, magically find Deuteronomy and go from there. And then that rebuilding of the temple and so on that was done by Cyrus, and Cyrus the Great, a Persian, an Aryan. So that definitely makes the connections there. And that was supposed to have been their release, ta-da, but nobody wanted to put it as a ta-da. It's a strange thing, but seems like a people ever perpetually waiting on something. And even though Ezekiel and a lot of these people came and da-da, and Isaiah and all these others, it never quite kicked in for them. And that's why I tell you, it's another reason, instead of what to do, it's a telling of what not to do. And the outcome is what we're looking for. And it's really a tale back through time of most all of these people all thrown together kind of in a strange way, and written in more of a humanistic form as opposed to putting as many deities on it and always giving credit for everything having happened to the one God, which is like the sun. And the same thing goes with all of these people too. So everybody says, oh, but see, this one is totally different. It's like, no, not really. It's still got the same concept to it. Marduk, this Sumerian smelling, is in Akkadian is Amar Utu, and that actually means like solar calf. And this shows you that calf worship and coming down from Sinai and everything. It's kind of strange. And I've talked about that little separate Exodus and everything, but and perhaps it comes from Meredug, and Mary would actually transpose later in the language to being with the water and with the land. And it was the Babylonian name of a late generation god. As I tell you later, Marduk is like the third incarnation of that rolling situation. And if we go to the Inanna and Dumuzi and say that's really a second coming, just like Jesus, off the original one of Enki and the flood and the story of the origin, you have that telling and it leads up in, but then it envelopes and it happens again, and they keep using that story again thousands of years later. But when we're looking at it, you almost seem like, well, the next week, and it's not that way in any way, shape, or form. These places lasted a lot longer than we give credit for in the stories, some of which go back to a lot longer than we give any type of credit to doing whatsoever. So Marduk was a Babylonian name of the late generation god from ancient Mesopotamia, and a patron deity in the city of Babylon, who, when Babylon became political center of the Euphrates Valley in the time of Hammurabi, much later, 18th century BC, so actually 18 centuries before it had happened before, and that's 18 centuries before the telling of the second time, which is God knows how long before the first one actually had come about. It started to slowly rise to the position of the head of the Babylonian pantheon, a position he fully acquired by the second half of the second millennium BC. And so people said, oh, bam, and he took it over. And that's Nimrod, da-da-da. And it's like, no, actually that eased in, and it wasn't like snap in any way, shape, or form like the Theogony would have it say. According to the Encyclopedia of Religion, the name Marduk was probably pronounced Maratuk, and the etymology of the name Marduk is conjecture is derived from Amar Utu, or bull calf of the sun god Utu, and Utu is before Shamash, and it's the same situation. Utu seems to go back to Proto-Indo-European too, and Utu seems to be a much more primordial telling of Shamash and Shams. And so when you hear stories of Samson, who used to be Shamson, the son of Sham, the son of the sun. Oh wow, that's just like a Jesus thing too, and all these connections. Yeah, it's amazing how it just all keeps. And there's this spider who's just working while I'm talking and making all these connections, huh? Hopefully for you guys. Let me know over in the comments if it's happening. This one's getting up on 35 minutes. I'm going to keep going, try to get it closer to 45 so it's a cleaner change when we do. The origin of Marduk's name may reflect an earlier genealogy, so in other words, making that connection in his name with that elder time, another usurping of a concept and putting it in there and saying same, right? Or had cultural ties to an ancient city of Sippar, whose god was Utu, the sun god, dating back to the 3rd millennium BC, and so it had connections to that. In the perfected system of astrology, and the planet Jupiter was associated with Marduk by the Hammurabi period, so then we have that same Dios Pater. Marduk's original character is obscure, but he was later on connected with water, vegetation, judgment, and magic. And again, I guess I'll throw in right now, they talk about this dark sun and this hidden god and all this type of situation, and damn well, if you're giving him the idea and the connotation of this planet, during the day you'd be talking about it, and you can see the sun god, he's right there, and you're just a rubberneck and you can't see it. But during the day, you can't see the stars at nighttime. He's an unseen God. You don't see him. And one God has his eye open, and the other has it closed, and then da-da-da. And that is an idea of a moon, and he's watching you and stuff. He's the man in the moon and all these things. And that's a reflection off the sun in the first place, isn't it? Now I'm going to start getting esoteric. So I'll stop. Let's just continue here. So, Marduk's original character is obscure, but he was later on connected with water also, vegetation and judgment and magic. So he was also regarded as the son of Ea, or Sumerian Enki, and Damkina, and Dam or Dame, and where we get the idea of a woman, and the hair of Anu. So said that he was supposed to have been more divine because the woman part and the male part. Back then they had this sacredness with people's amount of deification that they could put together to be as holy as possible and stuff. And so if they had people before that were godlike and that they were connected and stuff, then you would, for somebody from that lineage, would have more power, and to hook up a male and female of the largest number was the best way to look at it in any way, shape, or form, right? But whatever her special traits and traits that Marduk may have were overshadowed by the political development through which the Euphrates Valley passed, and which led people of the time into imbibing him traits belonging to the gods, who in an earlier period were recognized as the heads of pantheons. So there were patriarchy of two gods, Ea and Enlil, or Enki, and whose powers and attributes pass over to Marduk in a usurping way. He almost did both in one, and so this is trying in some way to be a form of monotheism, and it didn't take off real well, and now is looked back as being, no, hell no, that isn't monotheism. Well, if you look at the Bible itself, it's not monotheism, for he has not all this pantheon going, but he's got all these angels that do everything, and then it's again taken on a human form, and so you get this concept that it's the same thing, but it's just told in a different way, and a little less mythological, if you will. In the case of Ea or Enki, the transfer proceeded pacifically and without effacing the other god. So it just smoothly did, and just kind of meh. We look at it this way, it seems like Enki is just a smothering over. And it's amazing that before Enlil and all, he was Lord of the earth. Enki, Ki is the earth, En is Lord, and so it means the same thing. Interesting to throw in here, Ingir is what is known as one of the epitaphs of the kings of Egypt, and especially in the earliest of dynasties and stuff, whereas, and Pharaoh is not really used, it means big house. What's strange about that is the gods that came down from heaven that started up all of Samaria, they are called Dengir. And it shows you another connection that people have. And everybody always says Sumerian is no linguistic connections, and there's way too many of them, and it's not actually just loan words, which is one other concept of connection that they still even don't try to give much credit for. And I think why is because it's stiff-armed. Not that it does connect just easily. Look, it's Proto-Indo-European, and so it has different linguistic. So does the Basque language, and a couple of others. But let's continue. So Marduk took over the identity of Asar-Luhi, the son of Ea and the god of magic. And so this is kind of like an idea that he would have been Hermes too. And so that Marduk was integrated with the pantheon of Eridu, where both Ea and Asarlu originally came from. So here's a blending. Father Ea voluntarily recognized the superiority of the sun and hands over him to the control of humanity. So instead of somebody being castrated and all that having to happen, it just goes on. Well, they did that in Sumerian too, where Anu is the heaven god and only made about 2 appearances on earth, and then Enki started it all off, where the original god was in heaven, and there's your starting pantheon, if you will, and the stories that come out of that. Oh, and I left something out important back about 20 minutes ago about this same thing and the story and the change, and it even goes into a little bit of what Sitchin had said, but I'm going to leave it alone. Hopefully you kind of caught it. We were talking about up north and the castration type thing. If you've read his story about the 12 and how he relates how it happened before and then into the Anu period and the first and people that came in and connections, that's because of that pantheon, and that's where he gets the idea from, for they have the blend themselves, right? Regardless of that. So anyhow, where are we at now? We're getting on 42 minutes, just a little bit longer, trying to make it just short of 45. So yeah, magic plays a lot into this, and I could go into magi's and magic and how sleight of the hand and stuff back in the day really meant something, and control over something. And if you could get somebody to show off magic, it seemed that you meant so much and that you had connections to the gods and were able to do things that others were not able to do. We still have that fascination with magic and stuff today. In fact, I'm going to leave it with that concept, the magi and 3 wise men that came from the east, and this conceptive idea that's nowhere near just a biblical tale, for all this goes together. And then the Bible talks about Babylon and things, and it doesn't really talk about Sumeria and where they originally came from. But if you read deep enough, Abraham came from Ur, and so before the flood, and the gods that they gave up and searched for other gods and went across the river, and everything that they did with it goes exactly with that and tells you the truth and reality of it all. And Eden is the name of the Sumerian plains, and between the Tigris and Euphrates, right where it says, and so on. And so definitely these Caucasians of the Bible that it has from there, and then of course later in Narada and the Caucasus Mountains, coming out of that boat and so on situation, shows you the connective of that and these Sumerian people and all these other connections. And there's a bunch more to come up. I've still got about 2 parts left in this. So look in your top left hand corner and click there, and we'll see you in part 5. Coming quite extensive, but I've been holding this off for far too long. We'll see y'all there. Top left. Come back and leave a comment. Peace.